Hmm. I click start streaming. I'm not sure that it's working just yet. I suspect that, yeah, okay. It looks like something's live. Let's see. Okay, something seems to be happening. Let's see here. Okay. Cool. I think we're live. Wonderful. Hey, Can Do. Welcome. So let's just talk about sort of what this is about. I titled the stream Morality in Literature, but what I want to do is I want to present 5 what I call moral provocations. These are 5 arguments in the world of moral thought, in the world of morality, drawn from both philosophers and also from fiction literature that I think are intriguing, compelling, hard to reckon with, and unintuitive, and largely out of step with the way most people behave. And so I want to present these to you in this video because I think they're worth wrestling with. I think they're worth thinking about. And I also want to present sort of how I respond to these provocations. As always, anytime I go live, there's an invitation for an open forum. It goes without saying. Any questions, responses, whatever you want. There's a great joy, of course, in interacting with a live audience, but also I'm happy to just sort of share what I've been thinking about and what I'm hoping to share. Of course, this topic is so interesting to me because it touches on, I think, the most important question that we could possibly ask, which is how to live, what's right, what's wrong, what do we owe other people. And before we jump into the provocations, I'll give a high-level overview of what these 5 provocations are. I think some of them may be familiar to you, the viewer. Some might be new. And I hope you'll agree that these are all really interesting ideas worth thinking about. I'm going to present the provocations and I'm going to present sort of my response to the provocations. Okay? I call them provocations because I think they're compelling. I think they're important, but I think that most of us don't agree with them. If we did, I think the world would look very different than it does today. So in that sense, it's a provocation. How do we respond to it? I'm going to share my responses. I don't expect anyone to take my responses and just assimilate them and assume them for themselves. Of course, I think that the provocations sort of stand on their own, and there's an invitation to either engage in dialogue or just sort of, wrestle with them on your own, or come to your own conclusions about each one of them. So what are these 5 provocations that I want to touch on today? These 5 theses of morality, these 5 perspectives. You can call them moral systems at times, visions of morality, and visions of prudence. How should we act? Not necessarily just visions of morality, but is morality even relevant to the human project? So what are the 5? Number 1 is Marquis de Sade and his extreme vision of what we can call sadism. Of course, the word sadism comes from Marquis de Sade, and we're going to look at that. Number 2, the provocation of Peter Singer. That's his first name, right? Peter Singer? I'm pretty sure it's Peter Singer. Yeah, Peter Singer, yeah. A much more recent moral philosopher who is going to provoke us in the opposite direction. He's associated with utilitarianism. He's associated with impartiality in ethical thinking. He's associated with effective altruism, which is a very common, relevant idea in the modern world today. And he sort of takes the opposite extreme relative to Marquis de Sade. And we're going to talk about that. Third, David Benatar, antinatalism. Benatar's asymmetry, a very powerful, compelling, moral provocation, which I've wrestled with a lot over the course of my life, and I've thought about a lot over the course of my life, and I still continue to wrestle with. Number 4 is Nietzsche. If we have time, I imagine, I sort of anticipate we're not going to be able to go so deep into this, just for the limits of time. I don't want to be here all night long, but we're going to touch on Nietzsche's idea of morality, of going beyond good and evil, of the Superman, of what some people call virtue ethics. There's a lot to unpack there, and I think it's a wonderful, powerful, beautiful provocation. And the 5th one, I'm going to pull from a few different sources, but the first, I think the most interesting source that I have is the character of Father Zosima in The Brothers Karamazov. He's a mystic, he's a spiritual leader, and he puts forth a vision of how to live. And that is basically this vision of growing and training and developing in love. And I'm going to hopefully pull in from a few other sources. I don't think he's the only person to put forth this vision, but it's a very different view of how to live. It's also anti-morality in some ways, and we're going to unpack that, and we're going to look at that, and we're going to explore that directly in these texts themselves. So that's the project. That's the goal. Of course, there's invitation for back and forth, but if that's not going to happen, that's okay too. Let's pull up 100 years of Sodom. Give me a second. We can also maybe give a little bit of background. Let me just adjust my streaming software. Oh, that was the wrong one. That was surprising. So, how do I fix this? Let's start by minimizing. Is that going to work if I minimize? That's pretty annoying. That didn't do what I expected. That did not do what I expected. Okay, well, we're going to have to fix it on the fly. What's the best way to do this? Why is that happening? So let's go here, here. Let's try this again. Sorry for the technical difficulty. That's pretty annoying. If I go here, okay, I think now it's working. Hopefully. Okay, I think now we're in business. Let's try this again. Marquis de Sade. 120 Days of Sodom. Published in 1785. In France, I believe. Written in prison, perhaps? This is a very banned book. A lot of people have are understandably horrified by this book. As I mentioned earlier, it's where we get the word sadistic from, sadism. And it's a book that is describes these aristocrats at the time, 1700s, who just commit horrible forms of torture and abuse and sexual abuse. And that's just sort of their project. Their project is one of hedonism, of indulgence, of pleasure seeking, and for them, that means abusing in the most horrific ways. And that's what Sade wrote about. And these characters, they philosophize. They make arguments. They make the case for their behavior. So let's look at that. Duck is one of these characters. This is towards the beginning of the book. And this character, this aristocrat, describes his philosophy of life and how he thinks about himself versus other people. He says, there are plenty of people who misbehave save when passion spurs them ill. Later, the fire gone out of them, their now calm spirit peacefully returns to the path of virtue. They only misbehave sometimes. This is regular people. This is you and me, okay? And passing their life, going from strife to error and from error to remorse, they end their days in such a way there is no telling that what roles, in such a way there is no telling just what roles they've enacted on earth. He's describing us. We're tortured by morality, right? We do good sometimes, then we do bad sometimes, and then we regret it, and we're tortured back and forth. Such persons, he would continue, must surely be miserable. And he's not wrong in a way, right? I mean, it can be a miserable experience to wrestle with one's conscience, to feel the shame and the guilt of having done evil, of having failed in the case of our relationships and how we treat other people, must surely be miserable, forever drifting, continually undecided. Their entire life is spent detesting in the morning what they did the evening before, certain to repent of the pleasures they taste. They take their delight in quaking. In such sort, they become at once virtuous in crime and criminal in virtue. However, our hero would add, my more solid character is a stranger to these contradictions. I do my choosing without hesitation, and as I am always sure to find pleasure in the choice I make, never does regret arise to dull its charm. He says, I've liberated myself from your tortures of conscience. I never feel regret. Firm in my principles, because those I formed are sound and were formed very early. I always act in accordance with them. They have made me understand the emptiness and nullity of virtue. I hate virtue, and never will I be seen resorting to it. They have persuaded me that through vice alone is man capable of experiencing this moral and physical vibration, which is the source of the most delicious voluptuousness. So I give myself over to vice. I was still very young when I learned to hold religion's fantasies in contempt, being perfectly convinced that the existence of a creator is a revolting absurdity, in which not even children continue to believe. I have no need to thwart my inclinations in order to flatter some god. These instincts were given to me by nature, and it would be to irritate her were I to resist them. If she gave me bad ones, that is because they were necessary to her designs. I am in her hands but a machine which she runs as she likes. And not one of my crimes does not serve her. I should be a fool to disobey her. Okay. What did we just read? There's a lot of this which is hard to argue with. The argument is that we are animals. We are part of the animal kingdom. And virtue and morality and religion are human inventions. And they torture us. The pangs of conscience, the rules of religion. And Duck, this character, says, you are lying to yourself. You are alienating yourself from your true nature, which is animal. He says, liberate yourself from the shackles of morality and embrace what you are, which is amoral or immoral. Seek pleasure. That's the argument. I don't think it's so hard to respond to this provocation. I don't think it's particularly challenging. Not only that, our character, our hero Duck, he also articulates some responses. So let's actually find those. This is important. Before we go any further, let's read Duck's articulation of the common objections, because it doesn't feel hard to object. It doesn't feel hard to see through this argument. And Duck understands. He says, if one were to raise the objection that nevertheless all men possess ideas of the just and the unjust, which can only be the product of nature, right? So nature gave you appetites, congratulations. Nature also gave you a sense of what's just and unjust, since these notions are found in every people and even amongst the uncivilized. So that's the counter argument. Nature gave us appetites, nature gave us morality. The Duck would reply affirmatively, saying that, yes, those ideas have never been anything if not relative, and that the stronger has always considered exceedingly just what the weaker regarded as flagrantly unjust, right? He says, you're weak. And so that's compelling to you. But look at nature. Those rules of yours do not apply to the powerful. It takes no more than the mere reversal of their positions for each to be able to change his way of thinking too. Okay? Is that answer clear? We can go on, but we'll stop there, right? I don't think it's a mystery why we're not Sadian in the modern world. I don't think it's a hard question to answer. Why you and I and our friends and our relations don't behave this way. Number one is we don't have the appetite for what Sade describes. It's not typical, apparently. That's number one. Number two is I don't think any of us are convinced that the hedonistic pursuit of that kind of pleasure will really bring long-term happiness. I think most of us understand that what's sort of being described, this kind of obsessive pursuit of immediate gratification, is no different than drug addiction, in the sense that it, in the short term, might seem great, but it leads to ruin. It leads to ruin on many levels. It leads to ruin because we get inured and desensitized to these things, and they sort of lose their luster, and it leads to ruin because we live in a society where cruelty is punished. So it's not much of a mystery. But I think what's equally important to recognize, and the reason I want to sort of start with this is before we sort of move on to maybe more challenging questions, I do believe that there's an insight here into the world we live in. I do believe that when we look around, we do see a lot of truth in what Sade is saying. It's not relevant for you and me necessarily, hopefully, but it rears its head. One of the biggest political issues in America today is the fact that the Republican Party, on every level, is doing everything in their power to not release the Epstein files. Epstein is a Sadian character, a child abuser. Our president, Donald Trump, wrote a fawning birthday letter to him talking about their little secret that they kept between them, which probably, reading between the lines, is the little secret that these two good friends have, that Epstein is a child molester. And that's just, the tip of the iceberg. There's lots of examples of that. And I think the invitation, the argument, the importance of Sade is to say, look, see it clearly. See it for what it is. It's human. It's animalistic, and we're animals. It's natural. It's awful. It's horrendous. It's cruel. It's abusive. It's sick. It's all these things. But it's not foreign to you. it feels um, it feels so foreign, it feels so alien, it feels so evil. But the argument is not. It's human. And if you want to combat it, which of course we all do, then recognize that it's a product of unchecked power. It's an outcome of unchecked power. It could be also a product of trauma and appetites run amok and other things as well. But it's a product of unchecked power. And it's not foreign to us. It's not something alien. It's part of the human condition. And another example worth mentioning as an example of how pervasive this is to the world that we live in. I think a lot about an experience that political events that I lived through, and I vaguely remembered at the time. I remember from the time, but I've since read up upon, which is the Abu Ghraib torture scandal, which was unspeakably Sadian. I don't think people know this either because they were too young when it happened, or they don't remember well. It wasn't just torture. It was Sadian torture. It was sexual torture. And that's not uncommon. When you give people unchecked power, that's what happens. Not to everyone, of course, not to every human being, not to you or me, but to humans in general. Unchecked power leads to horrors, and that is part of the human condition. And we'll leave it at that. I think we did enough with Said. I don't think we want to spend any more time on him. So let's go on to our second provocation. Peter Singer. We go now to the opposite extreme. Let's see if this is going to work. Do we all know who Peter Singer was? Okay. Australian moral philosopher, still alive today. Very beloved. A lot of people that I deeply respect and deeply admire are big fans of Peter Singer. I have not read enough Peter Singer. I hope to read more of him. But for our purposes today, that should be fine. Peter Singer, like I said earlier, is associated with utilitarianism, impartiality, the sense that all human beings have equal moral worth, and our actions should be to maximize some measure of benefit. I say some measure because his version of utilitarianism, I believe, is like I forget what it's called. Some sort of I'm trying to read in my notes what exactly it was called. Some sort of choice selection utilitarianism. I don't remember exactly what it's called right now, but his version of what we're trying to maximize is not the most common. It's not like we're maximizing just raw, immediate pleasure. He has quite a sophisticated vision of how that works in practice. In 1972, he published an essay, Famine, Affluence, and Morality, in which he makes the following provocation. Giving money is regarded as an act of charity, right? It is not thought that there is anything wrong with not giving. That's true. Giving is seen as a moral good, but not as a moral necessity. The charitable man may be praised, but the man who is not charitable is not condemned. People do not feel in any way ashamed or guilty about spending money on new clothes or a new car, or instead of giving it to famine relief, right? That's true. When I buy new clothes or a new car, I don't feel guilty that I didn't give it to famine relief. Indeed, the alternative does not occur to them. Peter Singer, This way of looking at the matter cannot be justified. When we buy new clothes, not to keep ourselves warm, but to look well dressed, we are not providing for any important need. We would not be sacrificing anything significant if we were to continue to wear old clothes and give the money to famine relief. By doing so, we would be preventing another person from starving. It follows from what I've said earlier that we ought to give money away rather than spend it on clothes, which we do not need to keep us warm. To do so is not charitable or generous. Giving your money away is not charitable or generous. Nor is it the kind of act which philosophers and theologians have called supererogatory. An act which it would be good to do, but not wrong not to do. On the contrary, we ought to give the money away. And it is wrong not to do so. What a provocation, right? The extreme opposite of Saad. We sort of set up two poles. The question is, what do we owe each other? What do we owe other people? On one answer is nothing. We owe each other nothing. All we owe is to ourselves, if anything. And the other extreme is you owe everything. The way in which Peter Singer sets up this argument, which we didn't read, but is very compelling, is that if you passed a child drowning in a lake, and you can save that child at no cost to you, or a small cost to you, the cost of your clothing, the cost of your shirt, $50, whatever the case may be, and you chose not to save that child, you would be rightfully regarded as a moral monster, Peter Singer says. And that is true. He says, there's no difference between a child drowning right next to you and a child drowning on the other side of the world, if you can save them and you choose not to. He argues we owe everything. His ideas are associated with effective altruism, which we're not going to go into now, but they have interesting ideas. They say that to be altruistic, to be generous, to live aligned, a moral life, aligned with sort of what Peter Singer sees as a moral life, you should work in finance. Don't work in climate change, renewable stuff. Don't work in the nonprofit sector where you're helping homeless people. All that stuff is garbage. Work in finance. Go to a good school. Rise to the top of a hedge fund. Make your money skimming pennies off the top of high frequency trades. Become a millionaire and give all your money to charity. It's funny because that feels very inhuman, right? That feels very unnatural, but that's what they talk about. That's what they argue. Sam Bankman-Fried is a famous effective altruist, by the way. That's a story for another time. So how do we respond to this provocation? There's a very tempting idea not to respond to it. I'm tempted not to respond to it, right? Why respond to it? Why push back against it? Maybe someone will watch this video or read this article and be moved to give more money to charity. Wouldn't that be a great thing? Why even try to respond to this provocation? Maybe we should just endorse it. I'm skeptical of the idea that creating a moral bar that is unrealistic and that we see just in practice that people do not live up to and are unlikely to ever live up to, and sort of seeing that as a way to live our lives is productive in the long run. So I am tempted to respond to it. And so to respond, we're going to look at a really beautiful essay from a British philosopher named Bernard Williams, Persons, Character, and Morality. I'm going to pull that up in 1 second here. Cool. Let's pull up a really beautiful essay called Persons, Character, and Morality. And I'm very excited to share this. Okay. So Bernard Williams is interested in addressing this kind of utilitarian thinking. And he develops this idea of projects. He says that human life revolves around projects. He says they're like the foundation of our lives. Okay, what is a project? For a project to play this ground role, okay, let me take a step back. These projects are foundational to our lives. These are our goals. These are the things we care about. And crucially, they make our life worth living. They bring meaning to our lives, okay? He says, for a project to play this ground role, it does not have to be true that if it were frustrated or in any of the various ways he lost it, he would have committed suicide. Nor does he have to think that. Other things, or the mere hope of other things, may keep him going. But he may feel in those circumstances that he might as well have died. Okay? These projects are the things that give our life meaning. If we lost them, our life would lose meaning. And these projects are largely our human relationships, our goals, the effect we see ourselves making in the world, the things we hope to accomplish, the things that give our life meaning. A man who has such a ground project will be required by utilitarianism to give up what it requires in a given case if it conflicts with what he's required to do as an impersonal utility maximizer when all the causally relevant considerations are in. That is quite an absurd requirement. Bernard Williams says, right? Utilitarianism, Peter Singer, are going to say to you that to be moral, you can't pursue certain things. You can't pursue certain relationships. You can't pursue certain advancements in your job and the things that give you meaning. And Williams says that's absurd. There can come a point at which it is quite unreasonable for a man to give up, in the name of the impartial good ordering of the world of moral agents, something which is a condition of his having any interest in being around in the world at all. It's a beautiful argument. I don't know if it's compelling to you or not. It might not be. You can push back on this argument. It's not going to convince everyone. I'm sure it doesn't convince Peter Singer. But I find it very elegant. To become in conversation with the world of morality, we first have to have a life that is meaningful. And so that's going to come first, Williams is going to argue. And now we get to my favorite part of this essay. This is, I think, worth remembering. He describes a scenario over here, okay, where you have a choice. This is who writes this? Where is this a quote from? Freed. I don't know who Freed is. A moral philosopher. Along the lines of a kind of Singer utilitarian way of thinking about the world, okay? And he says in this example, you have two people who are dying in a burning building. One is your wife, one is a stranger. Who should you save? From this objective God's eye point of view, there's no reason to favor one over the other. They're both human beings. One happens to be your wife. And so Freed, and I assume someone like Peter Singer as well, can come up with the reason why under utilitarian calculus, where every life is the same, you should still save your wife. Why? Because it's good that we live in a world where people prefer their family members over strangers. Okay. So we have this parentheses. This logic, right? The logic that was sort of cited above, could be combined with a variety of higher order thoughts to give it a rationale. Right? There's good that you can come up with a reason to save your wife. Rule utilitarians might favor the idea that matters of this kind, it is best for each of us to look after his own, like house insurance, right? A utilitarian can give you a reason why to save your wife over the stranger, okay? So Peter Singer might say, save your wife because society benefits when we look after our own people first. Williams, but this construction provides the agent with one thought too many. I love that. I love that argument. It might have been hoped by some, for instance by his wife, that his motivating thought fully spelled out would be the thought that it was his wife. Not that it was his wife and that in situations of this kind it is permissible to save one's wife. This touches upon a theme. Something we saw in our discussion of Sod earlier, something which we'll see again. There's an argument here that morality separates us from something which is fundamental, which is essential to what it means to be human, which is essential to our being. You can argue, of course, that Sod's vision of cruelty separates us from something that's fundamental to our being. And I would think that's absolutely true. But, the other side of the coin is that morality, too, can separate us from something fundamental to who we are. And to live in alignment with who we are, to live an aligned life, a life that is rational and comprehensible and worth living. You save your wife because she's your wife, not because you've come up with some utilitarian justification why it's okay to save your wife. I love that. And this is a rejection of this utilitarian kind of thinking. Is it compelling? That's for you to decide. Now we move on to number 3. Do you remember who number 3 was? Number 3 is our good friend David Benatar, South African philosopher. He's best known for advancing the position of antinatalism, the view that coming into existence is serious harm. He is the author of Better Never to Have Been, The Harm of Coming into Existence. Okay? Central to this view is his asymmetry argument. What a profound and important moral provocation. Again, it's a provocation because we don't live this way. Some people live this way, of course, obviously. But by and large, as a society, as human beings in the world, we don't assume that it's immoral to have children. But Benatar makes an argument that it is. And I would say it's quite a startling argument. So this is just from Wikiquote, because I don't have the whole book here. I haven't read the whole book, to be honest. Read parts of the book. I've read other books on antinatalism. But that's okay. For our purposes, this is all we need. The argument that coming into existence is always a harm can be summarized as follows. Both good and bad things happen only to those who exist. I lost it. Here it is. However, there is a crucial asymmetry between the good and the bad things. The absence of bad things, such as pain, is good even if there is nobody to enjoy that good. Okay? If a person is in tremendous misery and they do not want to live, we believe in general, as human beings, most of us believe that putting them out of their misery is a good thing. Ending that misery is a moral good. Not giving birth to a child that's going to live a life of abject suffering and torture is a good thing. Whereas the absence of good things, such as pleasure, is bad only if there's someone who's deprived of those things. We don't mourn the fact that there isn't a race of very happy aliens on Mars. That's not bad. It's not bad because there aren't people having a great life. That's the asymmetry. I've read a lot of the counter arguments, which you can find online on Wikipedia. You can ask ChatGPT. I don't find them so compelling. I think it's a compelling argument. I think it's an incredible provocation. So what do we do with it? I see this as a really important question. I see this as a really important test for our moral thinking. There's a book called Reasons and Persons by Derek Parfit. Do we know who Derek Parfit is? Derek Parfit has an appearance in the show The Good Place, if you ever saw The Good Place. When they do the on the blackboard, there's like a lesson in morality, and they write Socrates, Kant, and Parfit on the board. British philosopher, died in 2017. He has an incredible argument in his book Reasons and Persons. He talks about a teletransporter. He says, should we read it? Teletransporter. I enter the teletransporter. I've been to Mars before, but only by the old method, a spaceship journey taking several weeks. This machine will send me at the speed of light. I merely have to press the green button. Like others, I'm nervous. Will it work? I remind myself what I've been told to expect. When I press the green button, I shall lose consciousness and then wake up at what seems a moment later. In fact, I shall have been unconscious for about an hour. The scanner here on Earth will destroy my brain and body while recording the exact states of all my cells. It will then transmit this information by radio, traveling at the speed of light. The message will take 3 minutes to reach the replicator on Mars. This will then create out of the new matter a brain and body exactly like mine. I will be in this body. I will be in this body. It will be in this body that I shall wake up. Though I believe that this is what will happen, I still hesitate. But then I remember seeing my wife grin when at breakfast today I revealed my nervousness, as she reminded me she has often been teletransported, and there is nothing wrong with her. I press the button, etc. Right? Parfit explores this thought experiment, asking, are you the same person on Mars that you were on Earth? And the implied answer to that question is yes. Of course you are. Why wouldn't you be? You press a button, you're deconstructed here, you're reconstructed there, of course you're the same person. And so all the things that come with being a person, like we worry about a test tomorrow, you would still worry about the test tomorrow if you ride the teletransporter. You wouldn't be like, oh, that's someone else's problem. I don't have to worry about that test. That guy on Mars isn't going to have to worry about the test, because it's still you, of course. And then Parfit explores a thought experiment of one time you go into that room, you press the button, and nothing happens. You walk out of the teletransporter, and you're still here. Right? This is the continuation of this page. We're not going to read it. And you find out that you were transported to Mars. You were reconstructed on Mars, and you exist here on Earth now. So now there's two of you. So now you exist in two locations, because we've established that you're the person on Mars. We've established that. We all agree on that. And now you're also the person on Earth. And then Parfit says, well, what happens if you learn now that because of the malfunction, you have a heart defect and you're going to die in a few hours? How do you feel about that? The implied answer is, well, you'd be pretty, most people would probably be pretty sad that they're going to die. But you're on Mars. You live on. In the previous case where there's no problem, where everything works, you die instantly. What's the difference? You're just dying an hour later. What Parfit is getting at is that there are no rigid boundaries between selves. There's no deeper fact, he says. There's no deeper fact to self. There's no continuous self. To me, the implication of this thought experiment is that we can replace Parfit says the implication of this thought experiment is that the relationship between ourselves today and ourselves tomorrow and ourselves in a year is parallel, is directly parallel to our relationship between ourselves and other people. The distinction we make, the strong, hard-line distinction between self and other, Parfit argues, is ultimately illusory. It's based on an intuition about some deeper fact, he calls it, of identity that doesn't exist. There is no deeper fact of identity. We might be more or less connected to ourselves in the future. We might be able to sort of say, oh, the memories today are similar to the memories of the future, or our memories are less similar to the memories of the future. And my memories that I have and the memories you have might be quite different. And so I'm maybe more related to the person in the future than I am to you. But these are all measures of degree. Okay? So for me, the invitation is to see the project of human life as larger, expansive, shared. For me, what this thought experiment offers is an equivalence between the question of bringing a new life into the world, which is a fraught moral question, which may or may not be a good idea depending on the circumstances, and a different moral question, which is not exactly the same, but fundamentally at root sufficiently parallel, which is extending a life. It's also a potentially fraught moral question. If someone is suffering, or if someone is going to suffer tremendously, extending their life could be a problem. It could be morally problematic. It's not necessarily a simple question, but those questions are ultimately the same. I think what Parfit offers is this suggestion that this rigid distinction between my life and this other life is ultimately illusory. I think as a parent, what you learn from having a child is exactly what Parfit is describing. You learn this interconnectedness of human life. You learn the sense that through love of your child, you can see your child as an extension of you. You can feel their pain. You can be so invested in their project because you see them as a continuation of you. And to me, again, this is suggestions based on my own thinking. I don't know if this will resonate with anyone else. I don't know if these are bad ideas. They might be bad ideas. I don't know if these are compelling or not. I'm offering them up as a document of what I'm thinking, not meant to be prescriptive. I offer them up as a way to provoke conversation, but they're certainly provisional. But it seems to me that Benatar's asymmetry is based on this hard line distinction between the parent and the child as separate entities, as if like a parent is imposing life on a child, when we don't have to see it that way. A parent doesn't usually see it that way. A parent usually sees a child as a continuation of themselves in exactly the way Parfit describes. You could be on Mars and you can be on Earth, and you can be both. The life of that child, the consciousness of that child is an extension of you in a positive way, born out of love and infinite care for that child. I think parenthood teaches that. And so I think when seen through that lens, you can ask a serious moral question, is a life worth extending or not? That's a hard question sometimes. Sometimes it might not be. Similarly, you can ask a hard moral question, is it worthwhile? Is it morally okay to have a child? And it could be controversial, it could depend on the circumstance. But I don't see those as being separate. And I think that Benatar sees those as being totally separate. And I think that's a misapprehension. I think that is based upon an enforcing of a very strict distinction between self and other, between parent and child, which I think most parents don't find compelling. Parfit has a whole bunch of thought experiments. He's the master of these thought experiments. He talks about splitting the corpus callosum. He says, we know from experiments that you can take a healthy person's brain and split the corpus callosum, maybe as a treatment for seizures. And you can have two split brains that have left hemisphere, right hemisphere, that are not in communication with each other. And you can have two separate consciousnesses. So this idea of a unified consciousness, it's all illusory. The self is permeable. My consciousness is your consciousness. There's just life in general. And there's moments of experience. And it's all the same. It's all one big thing. Let's look what Parfit says. He says as follows. Is the truth depressing? The truth being there's no further fact of identity. That identity is just what you are in this moment. Is it depressing? Some may find it so, but I find it liberating and consoling. When I believed that my existence was such a further fact, that he said I existed as this entity in the world with a strict boundary. I seemed imprisoned in myself. My life seemed like a glass tunnel through which I was moving faster every year, and at the end there was nothing. At the end of which there was darkness. When I changed my view, the walls of my glass tunnel disappeared. I now live in the open air. There is still a difference between my life and the lives of other people, but the difference is less. Other people are closer. I'm less concerned about the rest of my own life and more concerned about the lives of others. When I believed the non-reductionist view, I also cared about my inevitable death. After my death, there will be no one living who will be me. I can now redescribe this fact. Though there will later be many experiences, none of these experiences will be connected to my present experience by chains of such direct connections as those involved in experience memory or in the carrying out of my earlier intention. Some of these future experiences may be related to my present experience in less direct ways. There will later be some memories about my life, and there may later be thoughts that are influenced by mine, or things done as a result of my advice. Parfit didn't have children. He could have said, I may have children. What a continuation is that? My death will break the more direct relations between my present experience and future experiences, but it will not break various other relations. This is all there is to the fact that there will be no one living who will be me. Now that I have seen this, my death seems to me less bad. Okay. That's Parfit. That's my suggestion of a response to Benatar's asymmetry. Is it compelling? You can tell me. I'm going to take a 1 minute, 60 or 70-second break. I'm going to run to the restroom. And I'm going to be right back. I apologize for the empty background. I will be back in a minute. Now we move on to provocation number 4. Do you remember who provocation number 4 is? Provocation number 4 is Friedrich Nietzsche. I love Friedrich Nietzsche. Nietzsche is associated with the Superman. He's another voice along the lines of Sade, who says, burn down morality. Liberate yourself from morality. He wrote Beyond Good and Evil. And Beyond Good and Evil sounds a lot like Sade. If you recall what we read earlier in Sade, this argument that virtue is relative, that when you have power, what's virtuous is power. And when you don't have power, what becomes virtuous is kindness, generosity, taking care of the sick. That's because you don't have power, Nietzsche says. But unlike Sade, Nietzsche's project is not this hedonistic pursuit of cruelty for cruelty's sake. Nietzsche presents us this vision of burning down morality to find something completely ecstatic, completely redeemed. What he calls the Superman. In a different context, I think in Twilight of the Idols, I have to double check, he calls it the kingdom of heaven. Of course, Nietzsche doesn't believe in God and doesn't believe in free will, and he's very anti anything religious. But he appropriates that language for what he's describing here. We're not going to have time, I think, to do Nietzsche justice, because I think he's a very complex and misunderstood thinker. But I do want to read some quotes. Okay. Zarathustra is Nietzsche's avatar. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, he comes down the mountain with this message. The people in the book, this is the very beginning of Thus Spoke Zarathustra, they scorn Zarathustra. They're not interested in hearing this message. They don't take him seriously. He becomes a sort of an outcast, sort of like a whole, wandering vagrant kind of character. But he tries. This is his attempt in the beginning of the book, right? Zarathustra spake thus unto the people, I teach you the Superman. Man is something that is to be surpassed. What have you done to surpass man? All beings hitherto have created something beyond themselves, and you want to be the ebb of that great tide, and would rather go back to the beast than surpass man? Nietzsche and Sade are very much aligned in their revulsion, their disgust of modern man. Modern man as a moral creature. Modern man as someone who has guilt and shame. Sade is horrified at those things. He says, liberate yourself. And Nietzsche says the same. But Nietzsche is describing a moving forward, where Sade seems to be describing more of a moving backwards, right? What is the ape to the man? A laughingstock, a thing of shame. And just the same shall man be to the Superman, a laughingstock, a thing of shame. You have made your way from worm to man, and much within you is still worm. Once were ye apes, and even yet man is more of an ape than any of the apes. Burn down morality and find something new. The Superman is the meaning of the earth. Let your will say the Superman shall be the meaning of the earth. I conjure you, my brethren, remain true to the earth. Believe not those who speak unto you of super earthly hopes, right? That's religion. That's morality. Poisoners are they, whether they know it or not. Despisers of life are they. His invocation is to love life. It's not hedonism that he's advocating. It's not pleasure seeking. It's a love of what is, amor fati. It's a love of the suffering. Nietzsche suffered tremendously. And his message was a love of what is, a love of everything, even the suffering. He talks about the religious people in this language. Despisers of life are they, decaying ones and poisoned ones themselves, of whom the earth is weary, so away with them. I was looking for a quote. I couldn't find it. That's okay. Twilight of the Idols. In Twilight of the Idols, Nietzsche makes a statement which seems like a direct response to a David Benatar, an antinatalist. A direct response. We gave sort of one response to Benatar before. Nietzsche gives another response. Is it a compelling response to David Benatar? You'll tell me. After all, judgments and valuations of life. What's he talking about here? He's talking here about pessimists. He's talking about people who say life is not good because it's full of suffering. He's talking in this paragraph about the David Benatars of the world, that it's harmful to bring someone into existence. This is his direct response. After all, judgments and valuations of life, whether for or against, cannot be true. Their only value lies in the fact that they are symptoms. They can be considered only as symptoms. What does that mean, right? If you say life is good, that's a symptom of something happening in your life. Congratulations. If you say life is bad, that's a symptom. That's not an alarm bell. That's some sort of signal about something happening in your life. Great. That means that something bad has happened, or something is happening in your life. That tells us information. Okay, but that's it. That's all it does. It's just a signal about what's happening in your life. Per se, such judgments are nonsense. There is no such thing as life is good, life is bad, life is worth living, life is not worth living. Life is harmful. It's harmful to bring this life being into existence. Doesn't exist, Nietzsche says. You must therefore endeavor. This is the invitation to the perspective of the Superman. This is Nietzsche's perspective, and this is what he tries through his whole canon of work, of writing, to convince you of. You must therefore endeavor by all means to reach out and try to grasp this astonishingly subtle axiom. This is what he's trying to teach you. The value of life cannot be estimated. A living man cannot do so because he is a contending party, or rather the very object in dispute and not a judge. Nor can a dead man estimate it for other reasons. I think that's a joke. He can't estimate it because he's dead. For a philosopher to see a problem in the value of life, that's David Benatar, is almost an objection against him. A note of interrogation set against his wisdom, a lack of wisdom. Okay? Nietzsche says anyone who tells you that life is not worth living is a kind of a charlatan. Similarly, for anyone who says life is worth living, it goes both ways. He's not saying life is great. He's saying it's neither. And anyone who tells you otherwise is a charlatan. They lack wisdom. Okay. That's the perspective of the Superman. That's the perspective of amor fati, of love of fate. That's the invitation. That's the provocation. Is it practical? Is it useful? That's a hard question. Nietzsche himself said it's not practical. I forget the exact quote. I'm going to mess up the number of years, but he said something like, no one, the person who can understand my books hasn't been born yet. Not for 200 years will we see someone who can understand my books. But Nietzsche would say it doesn't have to be practical. Nietzsche's embrace of fate is very inclusive. It embraces everything. It even embraces the non-supermen. We're going to sort of pivot away from Nietzsche now because this is part of a bigger project. I happen to have an hour-long video of Nietzsche on my channel if you're curious. It's titled Nietzsche is Dead and We Killed Him. And that's a pun on Nietzsche's famous quote that God is dead and we killed him. I read Nietzsche as just being full of love, which is sort of a funny thing to say because he's also associated with some very ugly political views and language, which I think is often interpreted in quite ugly ways and for understandable reasons. I mean, he was certainly an advocate of slavery and hierarchy and an enemy of democracy and all these things. But nevertheless, for reasons which we're not going to go into right now, I can't not read Nietzsche, meaning I can only read Nietzsche as just being steeped in this tremendous love of life and love of people, because those two things go hand in hand. Okay. And that will take us nicely to our fifth character, our fifth argument, our fifth perspective. And for that, we're going to look at Father Zosima from the Brothers Karamazov. Early in the Brothers Karamazov is one of my favorite chapters of all time in all of literature. I had a series back in the day of the best chapters in all of literature. I'm thinking now I should do one on this chapter. It's so good. Alyosha, the youngest son, is become a monk in the monastery. His father what's his father's name? Fyodor Karamazov. The father is in a financial dispute with the older son, Ivan Karamazov, and they go in front of the elder, Father Zosima, who's like the spiritual head of this monastery, for arbitration. And Fyodor Karamazov is such a buffoon. And anyway, we meet this character, Father Zosima. And Father Zosima has to step out of the room for a little bit because there's like a bit of chaos in the room that Fyodor Karamazov creates chaos. He's in a fight with someone else. It's a mess. And he goes out to sort of meet the people who came to see him. People come from afar to see him. A woman comes to him and says that she has no faith. She has faith in God, but not in the afterlife. And she says, how can I be convinced of an afterlife? I'm not a Christian. I'm not so convinced in the Christian afterlife myself. But I read this in a way which to me is very affecting and very touching. Because I read this as a question of immortality, of safety and security. Going back to Parfit. Parfit describes feeling contracted in this body, in this self, where you live, you're born, you live for some time, then you die. And he describes an opening up of that boundary, of being in the open air, of experiencing what it's like to not be able to die, to be immortal, because you're part of this larger human consciousness where there are no boundaries. And that's how I read this dialogue. She's saying she doesn't believe in the afterlife. I read that as, in translating that to my own language, the sense of contraction, the sense of restriction, the sense of vulnerability, finitude, right? How can I see through that, she asks Father Zosima. Can it be proven? He says there's no proving it, though you can be convinced of it. So the question here is how? How can I be convinced that I'm not a limited self? That I'm not going to just die and fade into blackness? How can I see what either a religious person believes, but more interesting to me, what Parfit saw? This open air of no birth, no death, of just life happening. The answer, by the experience of active love. Strive to love your neighbor actively and indefatigably. In as far as you advance in love, you will grow sure of the reality of God and of the immortality of your soul. If you attain perfect self-forgetfulness in love, right? That's the mission. That's the goal. Perfect self-forgetfulness in love of your neighbor. Then you will believe without doubt, and no doubt can possibly enter your soul. This has been tried, this is certain. In the project of love, I think we have good intuitions about what love means. I think we understand what love means, like the love of a child, for example. It's that sense of connectedness, the way a child is a continuation of you, the way you can see yourself, your own consciousness, your own being in that child. To see that in other people is to enter into this wider space, this open air, where there is no death. And there's certainty. They now have an amazing dialogue. Such an incredible dialogue. She tells him, I love people in theory, but in practice it's so hard. And how true is that? How true is that? How important is that? How deep an insight is that? It's easy to love in theory. I love humanity. She says, I want to, give my life to the service of mankind, right? Imagine the effective altruist, the Peter Singer. I'm going to go and give my life to working in Africa, or wherever the case may be, wherever they need me, saving lives, right? But she says, but people annoy me. She says specifically, if they don't show gratitude, I'll just be super annoyed at them. What a confession. And Zosima says, yeah, this is just the same story as a doctor once told me. He was a man getting on in years, undoubtedly clever. He spoke as frankly as you, though in jest, in bitter jest. I love humanity, he said, but I wonder at myself, the more I love humanity in general, the less I love man in particular. In my dreams, I have often come to making enthusiastic schemes for the service of humanity, and perhaps I might actually have faced crucifixion if it had been suddenly necessary, and yet I am incapable of living in the same room with anyone for 2 days together. I detest men individually, the more ardent becomes my love for humanity. And what can be done? He says honesty. Above all, avoid falsehood. His father Zosima's answer, every kind of falsehood, especially falseness to yourself. Watch over your own deceitfulness and look into it every hour, every minute. Avoid being scornful, both to others and yourself, right? Accept others and yourself. This is wisdom, in my opinion. In my opinion, our capacities to tolerate others is a reflection of our capacities to tolerate ourselves. The things that we detest in others, I believe, are reflections of the things that we detest in ourselves. And our capacity to love others is a reflection of our capacities to love ourselves. What seems to you bad within you will grow pure from the very fact of your observing in yourself. Avoid fear too, though fear is only the consequence of every sort of falsehood. Never be frightened at your own faint-heartedness in attaining love. Don't be frightened overmuch, even at your evil actions. Okay? But there's this vision of morality which is so new to anything we've seen so far, where morality is partly a function of who you can endure. Morality is partly a function of who you can tolerate. Morality is a function of what you give to the people around you. Morality begins in this vision with your just immediate relationships. What's in front of you is your moral obligation. It's the antithesis of that utilitarian, effective, altruist perspective, where that view is mathematical. That view is morality as a science. There's another liberation from morality here. Like Sade, like Nietzsche, forget moral reasoning. Forget moral thinking. Just love people. Just see yourself in other people. That's it. That's all there is. That's all you can do. And Father Zosima says it comes from loving yourself, forgiving yourself. Learn to be patient with other people by being patient with yourself. Father Zosima is this advocate of unconditional love and acceptance and forgiveness. A woman comes to him and says, I committed a terrible sin. She basically confesses to killing her husband. It's ambiguous because we don't get it spelled out. Maybe she just prayed for her husband to die. She hated her husband, and now she feels tremendous guilt. Father Zosima's message is one of forgiveness, forgiving yourself, loving yourself. The vision here is that good behavior comes from a place of internal well-being, and bad behavior comes from a place of inner turmoil. Living with that guilt is not helping anyone. He says there, fear nothing and never be afraid and don't fret. If only your penitence fail not, God will forgive all. There is no sin, and there can be no sin on earth, which the Lord will not forgive to the truly repentant. Man cannot commit a sin so great as to exhaust the infinite love of God. Can there be a sin which could exceed the love of God? Think only of repentance, continual repentance, but dismiss fear altogether. Believe that God loves you as you cannot conceive, that he loves you with your sin, in your sin. It's a vision of infinite purity. Go and fear not. Be not bitter against men. Be not angry if you are wronged. Forgive the dead man in your heart what wrong he did you. The dead man being her husband that she possibly killed. Be reconciled with him in truth. If you are penitent, you love. It's all about love. And if you love, you are of God. All things are atoned for. All things are saved by love. The vision here is that morality comes from self-forgiveness, from self-acceptance. I believe that the cruel things that we do, the Sadian things that we do, the evil things that we do, are born out of our own suffering, are born out of our own. I think that we pass on our pain to other people, as parents, as friends. When we're unhappy, when we're miserable, we pass that on. And Zosima's message, Zosima's vision is find inner peace, find inner happiness, find inner love and acceptance, so that can be passed on to the people around you. If I, a sinner, even as you are, am tender with you and have pity on you, how much more will God? Love is such a priceless treasure that you can redeem the whole world by it and expiate not only your own sins, but the sins of others. Okay? And what a provocation, right? These are 5 provocations. What a provocation. The theme that comes up in this kind of writing is this vision of the whole of humanity. The sense that everyone belongs, everyone fits in. There's no atomization. We're all part of the same human project. Consciousness as a unified field. Everyone sort of plays their role. Everything is whole and complete. The Prophet by Khalil Gibran, a beautiful poem, book, short book, embodies the same exact spirit of Father Zosima, in a longer form, in a longer poetic form. He's addressing this town that he's leaving. I was unfamiliar with this artwork. Sort of came as a surprise. He's addressing this town that he's leaving. The ship is coming to take him away from this town, and he's addressing the people. And his message to them: the vast man in whom you are all but cells and sinews. You belong to this larger project. He in whose chant all your singing is but a soundless throbbing. It is in the vast man that you are vast. That's the open air that Parfit talked about. This is the redemption, the redemptive vision of love. And in beholding him that I behold you and loved you. For what distances can love reach that are not in that vast sphere? What visions, what expectations, what presumptions can outsoar that flight? Like a giant oak tree covered with apple blossoms is the vast man in you. His fragrance, his might binds you to the earth, his fragrance lifts you into space, and in his durability you are deathless. That's the open air in which there is no death. He continues, you have been told that even like a chain you are as weak as your weakest link. That is but half the truth. You are also as strong as your strongest link. To measure you by your smallest deed is to reckon the power of the ocean by the frailty of its foam. To judge you by your failures is to cast blame upon the seasons for their inconstancy. You are like an ocean. And though heavy grounded ships await the tide upon your shores, yet even like an ocean you cannot hasten your tides. It's a very similar message. It's writing from a very similar space of love and acceptance and this vision of the vast man. We're going to end with one more quote. This one from Leaves of Grass. I think this message is everywhere if you know where to look for it. I don't think it's hard to find this message. Father Zosima, the Prophet, Khalil Gibran. I used to be very skeptical of this message. I used to be very cynical towards this message. Today I'm less cynical towards it. Why? That's a discussion for another time. It's also a dangerous message, right? I think gurus can be dangerous. There's a danger here as well. Conversation for another time. Leaves of Grass, Walt Whitman. The man's body is sacred. The woman's body is sacred. No matter who it is sacred. Is it the meanest one in the laborer's gang? Is it one of the dull-faced immigrants just landed on the wharf? Each belongs here. Excuse me. Each belongs here or anywhere just as much as the well-off, just as much as you. Each has his or her place in the procession. All is a procession. The universe is a procession with measured and perfect motion. That's the vision, where everything belongs, everyone belongs. Walt Whitman's poetry is a poetry of infinite acceptance, infinite love. Everyone belongs. What have you thought of yourself? Is it you then that thought yourself less? Is it you that thought the president greater than you? Or the rich better off than you? Or the educated wiser than you? Because you are greasy or pimpled or were once drunk or a thief? Or that you are diseased or rheumatic or a prostitute? or from frivolity or impotence, or that you are no scholar and never saw your name in print? Do you give in that you are any less immortal? It's the same vision of immortality. It's that same open air. And where is it found? In this love. Walt Whitman's love, the love of what is, the love of the procession, the love of the people. And a lesson here is the way in which I think love and safety go hand in hand. That the capacity for love is dependent on a sense of safety. What's being described here is an infinite love, an infinite acceptance, and also an infinite safety. The safety of immortality, the safety of being in that open air, the safety of belonging to the larger man, the larger project of consciousness and life. Is it wonderful that I should be immortal, as everyone is immortal? I know it is wonderful, but my eyesight is equally wonderful, and how I was conceived in my mother's womb is equally wonderful, and passed from a babe in the creeping trance of a couple of summers and winters to articulate and walk, all this is equally wonderful, and that my soul embraces you this hour. When I read Whitman, I read a deep sincerity in his desire to connect with his reader. I don't think it's an act. I don't think it's a flourish. I don't think it's a rhetorical technique. I read a deep sincerity. My soul embraces you this hour. He means it. He doesn't see those boundaries as strict between us, between space and time. He lives in this much more permeable, from this permeable, open, broad perspective. We affect each other without ever seeing each other, and never perhaps to see each other. It is every bit as wonderful. And that I can think such thoughts as these is just as wonderful. And that I can remind you, and you can think them and know them to be true, is just as wonderful, right? When Parfit talked about how, in the larger sense of self, we live on, we exist here, and we exist in the ideas and the people that we influence. Ourselves are permeable. By communicating, we imprint our part of ourselves and we live on. And that the moon spins around the earth and on with the earth is equally wonderful. And that they balance themselves with the sun and stars is equally wonderful. That's it. That's all I got for today. I had a lot of fun sharing this with you. If you stopped by, thank you so much. I'll let the clock run a bit because I think there might be a delay. But thank you so much for watching.